If you think your employer has to fire you before you're pushed out, you're wrong. And that mistake could cost you every legal protection you didn't know you had. Most companies don't want to fire you. Firing creates exposure, retaliation claims, discrimination complaints, wrongful termination lawsuits. So instead, they make your role so uncomfortable, so unstable, so exhausting that you quit on your own and hand them the exit they wanted. Today, I'm walking you through 15 subtle signs your employer is quietly, deliberately pushing you out. Because once you resign, the legal ground shifts, and rarely in your favor. I'm Dre. Before this channel, I spent years on the inside of recruiting and compensation planning, sitting in on the exact conversations companies have about who they want gone and how to make that happen without ever writing the check for a lawsuit. I've watched managers get coached through this same playbook over and over, line by line. And it's rarely the manager's own idea. It's usually handed down from somewhere higher up, sometimes from HR, sometimes from legal, sometimes just from a director who wants headcount cleared quietly. So if you're on the receiving end of this and it feels personal, understand that it's often not personal at all. It's procedural. Before we get into it, hit subscribe because I break down exactly this kind of hidden corporate mechanism every single week. Here's the thing you need to understand first. What I'm describing has a name. Some people call it quiet firing. In legal terms, when it crosses a certain line, it can become what's known as constructive discharge or constructive dismissal, meaning you were functionally forced out even though you technically resigned on your own. Yes, this is real, and companies do it on purpose. But not always in the dramatic way people imagine. It's rarely one big moment. It's usually 15 small ones, stacked on top of each other, until staying starts to feel impossible. So let's go through them one at a time. Number 1. Your schedule suddenly changes for no operational reason. Maybe you've worked days for years, and out of nowhere, you're moved to nights. Maybe you have childcare pickups, a second job, medical appointments, or caregiving responsibilities, and suddenly your hours shift right around those exact obligations, as if someone pulled your calendar and built the new schedule around it. This usually isn't a coincidence. Inconvenience is a strategy, and companies use it because it's nearly impossible to prove intent behind a simple schedule change. On paper, it looks like normal business need. In practice, it's often designed to make your life difficult enough that you start looking elsewhere on your own. Number 2. Your responsibilities quietly disappear. You used to run projects. Now, you're left off the emails. You used to be in the room for decisions. Now, you find out after the fact, if you find out at all. This is sometimes called stripping the role, and it's one of the clearest signals something has shifted, because meaningful responsibility rarely disappears by accident. It usually gets reassigned to someone else while you're being eased out. The hard part is that it happens gradually enough that you might spend months wondering if you're imagining it. You're probably not. Number 3. Your deadlines get unrealistic and fast. Timelines that never existed before suddenly apply only to you. Deadlines shift without warning. What used to take a week now has to happen in 2 days, and nobody explains why. This one matters because it builds something specific, a documented performance record the company can point back to later if they ever need to justify letting you go. It's rarely about the work actually getting harder. It's about creating a paper trail that makes a future termination look reasonable instead of retaliatory. And the toll isn't just professional. Constantly missing deadlines that were never fair to begin with wears on your confidence, and that's often part of the point. Because someone who starts doubting their own competence is far less likely to push back or ask questions. If any of this sounds familiar so far, keep watching, because the next few signs are able to miss. Number 4. The oversight ramps up out of nowhere. Maybe you've had real autonomy for years, and now, suddenly, every decision needs approval. Every email gets a check-in. Every task gets picked apart after the fact. Work that used to get a quick nod now gets sent back 3 times for reasons that keep changing. If this is a sudden shift, rather than how things have always been, it's rarely random. A jump in scrutiny after a long stretch of trust usually means someone decided you needed to be watched closely, and that decision usually comes with a reason you haven't been told. Number 5, you start getting isolated from your team. Meetings you used to be in, you're no longer invited to. Group threads you used to be part of, you're quietly dropped from. Social events, gone entirely. Isolation is uncomfortable by design because pressure tends to work better when you feel like you're facing it completely alone. It's meant to wear you down faster than any single formal action ever could on its own. Number 6, your reporting line changes in a way that feels like a demotion even if nobody ever calls it that out loud. Maybe you're now reporting to someone with less experience than you, someone you personally train, or someone outside your usual chain who you've had friction with before. Reassignment like this is rarely neutral. It's often a deliberate signal, and sometimes it's designed to create exactly the kind of friction that gives the company a reason to document conflict down the road. Number 7, time off that used to be routine suddenly becomes a problem. Requests you'd get approved without a second thought now get delayed, questioned, or denied outright, especially requests tied to something protected like a religious observance, a medical need, or a family situation. I've seen situations where an employee had a recurring accommodation approved a full year in advance, only to have it pulled at the last minute. The 1-year tension with leadership had started building elsewhere. That kind of timing is rarely a coincidence, and when it overlaps with a protected reason for the time off, it can move from merely frustrating into legally serious territory fairly quickly. And this next one catches people off guard almost every time. Number 8, your physical or virtual workspace changes for no clear reason. You get moved away from your team, tucked into a high-traffic area, or placed under someone's constant direct line of sight, sometimes literally facing a manager's office instead of your old desk. It sounds small, but environment affects morale more than most people expect, and companies know that isolating you physically tends to work the same way as isolating you socially. Number 9, you're handed work that sits well beneath what you were actually hired to do. You came in for strategy, and now you're doing administrative tasks you haven't touched in years, or duties that have nothing to do with your real role or your title. Then, almost predictably, you get quietly criticized for not doing it well, even though it was never your job to begin with. This is a demotion that nobody officially ever calls a demotion, which makes it harder to challenge and easier for them to deny later. Number 10, feedback that used to happen privately now happens in front of other people. Meetings where you're called out directly. Emails where half the department gets copied. This isn't really about the feedback content anymore. It's about reputational pressure, making sure other people start to see you the way the company has decided you should be seen. Number 11, your performance reviews take a sharp turn for the worse, often right after you've done something the company didn't like. Filed a complaint, took a protected leave, got a new manager. Watch the timing here very closely, because a sudden negative review after years of solid ones is one of the most common patterns I come across, and it's rarely because your actual work declined overnight. What usually changes is the calculation around you, not your output, and the review exists to make that calculation look justified on paper. We're past the halfway mark now, and the next few get a lot more direct. Number 12, flexibility disappears. Remote work you've had for years gets pulled. Flexible hours get quietly revoked, and it becomes especially telling if you're the only one on your team losing it while everyone else around you keeps theirs, with no explanation for why you're the exception. Selective removal of a perk like this is often more about you specifically than about any genuine policy change. Number 13, your emails and requests start getting ignored. Approvals get delayed. Feedback goes quiet. This creates operational failures that end up looking like they're on you when really they're being manufactured through simple non-response. It's a slow way to build a file that says you're underperforming without the company ever having to say a word of it out loud. Number 14, policies suddenly get enforced against you specifically for things other people do constantly without a single consequence. Selective enforcement like this can already function as a strategy on its own, but it becomes far more serious if it lines up with something like your age, your gender, your race, a disability, or another protected characteristic. If you notice this pattern, document exactly which rule is being cited against you and document that other people are breaking that same rule without any consequences at all. And number 15, the big one, you get placed on a performance improvement plan. I need to be straight with you here. Some performance improvement plans are genuine attempts to help someone turn things around. But in most of the situations I come across, a performance improvement plan functions as a paper trail, not a rescue plan. A real improvement plan usually needs real time, something closer to 90 days, with goals that are actually achievable within that window. When you see a 30-day plan with vague, shifting, or nearly impossible targets, that plan usually wasn't built for you to succeed. It was built to document that you didn't, so the eventual termination looks earned instead of engineered. So what do you actually do once you start recognizing several of these at once? First, start documenting everything. Dates, emails, exactly who said what, and when each change started relative to anything you did, like filing a complaint or coming back from leave. A simple timeline, kept somewhere outside company systems, is often more valuable than people realize until they actually need it. Second, pay close attention to timing. Any single one of these signs on its own might genuinely mean nothing. Several of them stacking up right after a protected event is a pattern worth taking seriously. Third, and this is the part most people skip, talk to an employment attorney before you resign, not after. I'm not an attorney, this isn't legal advice, and every situation is different depending on your state and your specific facts. This breakdown reflects how these patterns generally play out under U.S. employment law. So if you're outside the United States, the underlying protections and timelines can look very different, and it's worth checking with someone familiar with your local employment law. But the core principle holds everywhere. Once you resign voluntarily, the legal landscape around wrongful termination and constructive discharge claims shifts, and it rarely shifts in your favor. A short consultation before you make that decision can completely change what options are actually available to you, and in some cases, it can even change how your eventual departure gets negotiated. Here's the truth to sit with. Not every hard job is illegal, and not every tough manager is quietly plotting your exit. Sometimes a job is just genuinely difficult, deadlines are genuinely tight, and a new manager genuinely does things differently. And none of that is automatically the same thing as being pushed out. But when you notice multiple changes stacking up right after you complain, right after you return from medical leave, or right after some other protected action, That's the moment to pause before you make any decision you can't take back. Document what's happening. Watch the timing closely. Get advice before you resign, not after. Because once you walk away on your own terms, you often lose the exact leverage that would have protected you if you'd stayed just long enough to handle it the right way. Recognizing the pattern isn't about becoming paranoid at work. It's about making sure that if you do eventually leave, you leave on terms you actually chose, with the facts on your side, instead of terms someone else quietly engineered for you. If this pattern sounds familiar, subscribe, because I break down exactly how companies build these paper trails every single week. And drop a comment telling me which of these 15 you've actually lived through yourself. I've got a follow-up coming on how to build your own documentation file the same way a company builds theirs, so you're never caught without proof when it actually matters most. I'll see you in the next one.